This is Platemark with me, Anne Schaefer. I'm an independent curator and I specialize in works on paper, prints, drawings, and photographs. My special love, however, is prints and the printmaking ecosystem. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem, and this is Series 3, in which I'm interviewing artists and curators and gallerists and printers, all the people who have a hand in making these wonderful objects that are so collectible and so affordable that you just can't resist. Today's guest is Art Hazelwood. He's an artist and an activist and an impresario and other things. He is from San Francisco, and he is an artist who walks the talk. We talk about teaching drawing at San Quentin prison and what that's like for all of those men who come and try and learn from the master. We hear about taking action instead of just making work about a certain topic, but actually doing something about it. Art has worked for a long time on homelessness in San Francisco and Get Out the Vote campaigns and all sorts of things. So he is really, truly an artist activist. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. We both get really philosophical about the meaning of art and how wonderful it is when it is meaningful and can affect the viewer to make them do something, to make them feel something, to make them think harder. And even cooler, Art will be at the Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair in March this year at our tabletop section for self-representing artists and book arts people. So you can wander over to Brooklyn, come see us, and you will meet Art amongst a lot of other people and actually many Platemark podcast guests. So put that in your calendar, March 27 to 30, and come on out. See me, see Art, see all sorts of people. Okay, let's see, housekeeping. I identify as a cis-het white woman and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images Art and I talk about are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also do a bunch of things over there. You can leave me a message, you can write a review, you can support the pod by hitting the support and donate button. Help me keep the lights on. All right, I think that is it. Let's get rolling. Art, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark today.
It's great to be here. Glad to be hopefully making a go of it with the technology we have today.
Yeah, this is try number 3, everybody. So keep your fingers crossed. You've been on my list for a while, and through various issues with technology, I've been, contemplating you and your work all summer. So here we are.
Right. I'm prepared to say exactly what I said last time we did this.
That's right. Can you, for our listening audience, introduce yourself?
My name is Art Hazelwood. I've been a printmaker since college, when I first sort of fell in love with woodcut in the intro to printmaking class and kind of let everything else go and just stuck with woodcut. I liked it because it was portable. I liked it because it was direct, and I stuck with that for a long time till I started doing screen print, which is also, another direct method, less ability to change things.
Is it direct? I guess.
Well, it's direct in the sort of sense of like it's either or. There's no in between tones.
Right.
So I think of screen print and relief as, especially screen print in its traditional forms, its handmade forms. It's more a stencil process, so similar to relief print in that you've got a black or a white.
Right.
And that kind of directness of expression, I think, is what appealed to me in both. So over the years, my work was always considered political by other people because I think my influences early on were all German expressionism, and people, without even looking at the subject matter, assume that German expressionism is political, which it isn't necessarily. But
oh, fair enough.
I came to San Francisco in the early 90s and discovered the street newspaper, sent them in my work, and really was directed into political art making through being able to have a venue to put it out, which was the street newspaper. And that started my whole political direction.
Was that how you made a living, doing illustration?
No.
Oh,
Street sheet is a paper that's sold by homeless people on the street for
okay.
for $1 in those days, and they would keep that money themselves. So it was all funded by volunteer effort on the part of the people who contributed to it, and even the printer. So,
wow.
But that was the way that I found my way into political art, as opposed to just sort of social commentary art. And from there, I moved with screen print more into a much more direct political direction.
Okay. That's a division line that I've never contemplated. That was fascinating. Social commentary versus political action. One being sort of personal and the other being outward facing and action generating.
It's a perfect description, yes.
Oh, all right.
You win. I think a lot of artists call their work political, which I would consider to be, a social commentary or a political commentary. I mean, political cartoons that are sort of commentary about the state of the world, as opposed to political in the sense of direct action or a function for a political movement.
Okay. I feel like you define yourself as an artist in a way that other people, in a way that's more expansive in a sense with the action part of the job description. And I think there's not a lot of you out there. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Well, there are a lot of political artists out there. 10 years ago, I was teaching at the San Francisco Art Institute, and the adjunct faculty unionized. And we started a group with students and staff and faculty called the San Francisco Poster Syndicate, which the purpose of it was to print posters for direct action. So at the beginning, it was about student grievances with the school or faculty, staff problems with the school. And because we were working with the union, SEIU, we started working on Fight for 15, which was the $15 an hour wage, which finally passed in California. And that was a direct street printing action. This idea of printing with an organization for the purpose of supporting that organization is the basic idea of what I think of as political art. Like an artist making a poster and going to an action and printing it, because this is my opinion, I think $15 an hour is a good idea, and I make a poster and print it. That's similar, but the difference is this direct interaction with the organizers is about their message. And so the artist has a support role. So I think of myself as an artist as being part of a team in the political world.
And I know you're involved with the homeless cause. I don't know how you... That sounds terrible. Oh, God.
The struggle for recognition of human rights.
Okay. Yes, that's a good one. I like that. That's better. But you have also contributed to other causes as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, the most consistent has been the Coalition on Homelessness and this organization called the Western Regional Advocacy Project, which is kind of a coalition of organizations around this country, mostly the Western U.S., of homeless rights organizations. So I'm working with these groups since I moved to San Francisco in the early 90s. So it's been a consistent thing. And one of the interesting things about that is how to represent the issue of homelessness visually. I curated a show 2008 called Hobos to Street People, which was a traveling show. And it was 1930s, Depression, New Deal, and the present, and trying to contrast artists' responses. In looking at all this work from the 30s, there's this, Rockwell Kent, these heroic figures. So poor people aren't represented as victims. They're represented with dignity and strength. And that kind of contrast and others inspired me to try to push different directions in representation of homelessness in my work. So that's been a consistent thing that I've been involved in, working on homeless issues. But I've also worked with a lot of unions. That's been a very big thing in recent years. The last 10 years I've been working with different unions, teachers' unions and city worker unions, and creating posters with them. And I'm working in the election season now with 2 different climate groups making postcards. We're printing as a group printing postcards that, handmade postcards, send them out to these groups. They write the postcards and try to get out the vote.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who would receive a hand-pulled, screen-printed postcard from Art Hazelwood, thinking I could just, people get those things and they're just like in the trash.
Right. Straight to recycling, I hope.
Well, of course, right. Sorry. Recycling. And not realizing, that's the thing about doing the political action thing, that the art becomes utilitarian in a way, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah.
I was reading about Jacques Collot.
Were you?
And this struck me years ago. It says the amount of work that an artist like Jacques Collot, earlier Renaissance artists, put into giant parades and giant dioramas that they constructed.
Yeah.
That is completely lost.
Yeah.
Completely gone. And was extremely short-lived. The king walked through a part of the town and there was this giant diorama of some mythological scene, and then it was thrown away. And I think, there's something to be said for art that's really of the moment, and some of it survives, maybe. Collot did etchings of those presentations. We have the etchings of those, and that's the extent of what survived. So I like that sort of things disappearing. I like the idea that art is not about lasting forever. Art is about the moment we're in now.
Okay, so that's an attitude that I can appreciate and get on board with. But as a museum person, it's really hard to think about people throwing away your postcards,
Right. Well, the thing is, I'll print 2,000 of those.
Right.
And if I'm presenting myself as if all I do is make posters and postcards, but I also make prints, woodcuts. I even do etchings sometimes.
What?
I know, it's unheard of.
Say it's not so.
I'll print an edition of 15. So if I print an edition of 15 and it sits in my print drawer, or I print 2,000 and I send them out, what are the odds? I don't know.
Well, yes. Boy, gosh, you're right.
I got an answer for everything.
Yeah. You subscribe to the democratic aspect of prints and printmaking and probably bristle at the idea of there being 5 in a drawer somewhere and nobody seeing them.
I really want to make the prints that I make, that I don't necessarily have an audience or a clientele that's going to immediately snatch those up. I want to make those. And that's part of being an artist, to want to make something without having a purpose in mind all the time. I just think that we have the ability to be very broad in what we do as artists. We don't have to just do one thing or think of art as being limited to only a gallery world or a museum world or only in the street.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. I have a hard time taking my museum hat off.
Well, the thing is, so I have worked as an assistant to several artists in their later years, cataloging their work and trying to get it into different collections. And because of that, I set aside 5 posters of everything that we print as a group, 4 of them to different archives.
Okay, that's good.
So everything's cataloged and maybe only 4 survive. The rest end up in the recycling bin.
Well, yeah, I guess, it's a rethinking of wow, it's fast. It's a whole other thing. I believe in the archive, and I believe in the importance of the archive, and I'm glad that you are collecting them. And I know that there are many things that are at the Library of Congress and at other places. So the work will stand. And I think sending them out into the world may not have some sort of evidence of that, but the idea of that you have worked through and with your entire career will stand. So I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, I've seen posters in the windows when we've done actions. Posters end up in people's windows, and I've seen people like, oh, I visited so-and-so, and their bathroom is full of your posters.
Nice.
So I know that there is some continuity.
Yeah, okay, good. Tell us about the show that's traveling for Mission Gráfica.
Mission Gráfica is a print studio started in 1981 in the Mission District in San Francisco. It's part of Mission Cultural Center, and it has a very interesting history. It was founded by a refugee from Chile, from the coup by Pinochet, and a Sicilian-American draft dodger. So Jos Santos and Rene Castro started Mission Gráfica in 1980, 81.
It's a screen print studio, mainly?
It is a screen print studio. I mean, they do have an etching press, but it's primarily been a screen print studio.
Okay.
And it's really international in focus, even though it was founded as a Latino, it's within a Latino center. It's been very much a sort of internationalist idea of political art and any kind of screen printing, really. It's not limited to political. And over the years, it had lots of different incarnations. I worked over the last 10 years writing a book with several of the founders. It wasn't terribly difficult. It was like I'd go to their house and we'd have big dinners and I'd record them and everybody would be drinking and talking about the past. And then I'd record it and I'd write this history of Mission Gráfica based on that. So together we completed a book a year ago, Mission Gráfica, Reflections of the Community in Print is the subtitle. It is now part of a touring show that is in, I think it's between shows right now. It was in Southern California and it's going to Colorado for a show in greater Denver area. I'm not sure exactly. So it was it's kind of interesting to write these histories of, I mentioned earlier, I wrote a book about hobos to street people, this idea of art in response to homelessness. And a small but important print studio in the Bay Area is also kind of a very niche world. But I think this interests me more than world historical artists or doing exhibitions of people showing at very fancy galleries. The reason it interests me more is because that's the world I live in. And I think when I was teaching at the Art Institute, I would always be, disappointed, I guess, when the MA students would be doing their thesis on somebody who's really famous. When there's all this history within the Bay Area that of artists completely overlooked, archives that are not paid any attention to, little movements within. One of the most interesting to me is the movements of leftist artists in the McCarthy era and post-McCarthy era, and how they got sidelined by both official government policy and the art world. Those artists who continued to make their work in the face of the dominance of abstraction, all of those things, nobody's interested. They're only interested in attaching themselves to some kind of art star.
Well, yes, I think
I'm being overly negative, but
no, it's okay. But I feel like these things always go in cycles. Like when I started at the Baltimore Museum in the year 2000, it was all about being, on the international stage, and we were strong in Matisse, and we had, this famous Van Dyck, and now it's much more. It has swung to the local. And they're much more interested in Maryland artists, or Baltimore specifically. And of course, expanding the canon with women, artists of color, blah, blah, blah. But like local, that was a bad word when I started in 2000. Right. So I think it just goes in cycles, honestly. And I agree with you. Like if you're in the midst of it, why not be in the midst of it truly,
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, that the idea that there is a cycle in it. I feel like every generation of curators that comes in gets to reevaluate what was the focus before.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, but there's this one probably not very well-known rule to people who aren't inside the curatorial offices, which is that there's been talk about deaccessioning and the dangers of it in recent years. And one of the rules, and I think it was written down, but maybe it was just unwritten, was that the person who came in couldn't deaccession anything that the immediately prior person had acquired.
Oh.
Because it was just too on the nose, Yeah.
But I have heard stories of that happening.
It does happen, but it's pretty rude. Like, couldn't you wait a few? Yeah, anyway. So amongst other things that you have done is that you teach drawing at San Quentin prison.
Right, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I started going into San Quentin 15 years ago. as a guest artist for a printmaking class. Katja McCulloch started this printmaking class in the early 2000s. Lino cut. They have a nice little press. And I started working on projects with them. One of the first projects I did was a steamroller print with the Center for the Book here. This very popular idea of printing steamroller. 3 by 3 foot lino cut is what we did. So we collaborated together, and of course they couldn't come on a field trip to see it printed, but...
You couldn't bring the steamroller into the prison?
No, couldn't do that either.
Dang.
So I've had a long relationship with the classes at San Quentin. It's run by the William James Association, which is a nonprofit that started it in 35 years ago, started this Arts in Prison project. Yet at one time it was expanded widely to, as the California prison system expanded, it also expanded. And then the Terminator governor, Schwarzenegger, came in and destroyed it. It survived only at San Quentin for a time as the nonprofit supported it without any outside funding. And now it's coming back up, and a lot of federal prisons are coming to the William James Association and working with them to establish arts programs in different prisons. There's lots of different variations on it, but it's back to a lot of the prisons in the state now. And a year ago, I started teaching the beginning drawing class, which is supposed to be the kind of entryway into the arts program. They have a mural program, which is really amazing. Some great work produced there. They have this print class. They have an origami class, which is really interesting.
Oh, fun.
Some other class, open studios kind of thing. So I'd never taught drawing before, but it's print adjacent, I think.
Well, I mean, what does my friend True say? Drawing is the backbone of any art education, right? You have to know how to draw.
And when I was a student at UC Santa Cruz, it was taught as, here's a model, here's some charcoal. My teachers were, I think, sort of Bay Area figurative in their approach, which meant, at least in their teaching style, was look and draw what you see. So that doesn't work so well in prison. For one thing, there's not much to look at, and we have each other. Still life is kind of a far-sought idea. They have tools, so we have done some tool still lifes, which have been quite fun. But there's challenges to prison life that make teaching a little bit different. And art is very valuable in prison. This is something that's quite interesting to think about, is that art has an actual economic value in prison, as opposed to, for most of society outside of prison, art is something that people, when they hear you're an artist, use a French accent to pronounce the word. But in prison, art is very important. One guy was saying to me, I'm drawing these Disney cartoon characters because I have no one on the outside to help me get money to buy food in the commissary. So literally, he can draw a Mickey Mouse with colored pencils, sell it on the yard to somebody who wants to send something nice to their family on the outside. And he can make enough money to buy some Blue Bunny ice cream.
Oh, my goodness.
The idea of what is good art is partially driven by what is sellable. And the highest skill is to be able to copy a photograph.
Sure.
So I don't want to have a class of us copying photographs. I'm a little bit like trying to push them away from that a little bit. I don't want to tell them like they can't do that or something, but I want to try to expand what they think of as appropriate for art. Most of my students are either Mexican or Mexican American. Bringing in some posada prints for Day of the Dead and showing them those, and showing them the excitement of those characters and the poems that have accompanied a lot of the posada imagery. They just loved it. And they'd never seen it before. And they really responded to it. So I think, this idea of like trying to expand what art can be is something exciting.
If we're starting at basically ground zero, although everybody doodles as a kid probably, and the goal is to make the thing look like the thing, right? Like, how do you make that jump from that to some conceptual idea of, underlying meanings or objects representing something else, or there's a whole kind of switch in thinking at some point, I think, at least for me. And how do you get that across? Because I didn't say it very well.
A lot of the guys that are in this class there's basically two parts to the class. There's an open studios part and there's a drawing class. So the open studios part, most of them are looking at some kind of contemporary painting book, contemporary watercolor or something, and they're copying or trying to copy in acrylic paint, watercolor paint. And I mean, I can't dissuade them from doing that. Most people who are making art in prison want to make something about the outside. They don't want to make something like, okay, I'm going to draw this situation that I'm in. But there's other people that I can sort of, it's not really my job to tell them what they should do and what they shouldn't do. But with the drawing group, I think it's more about trying different techniques, trying different ways to draw things, using charcoal as opposed to this finest pencil that they can use, can just open them up to this idea that they don't have to be drawing one specific way. They can try different media, different materials, and get an idea of what their strengths are. And I think that alone can start making them feel like art doesn't have to be one way. It can be many different ways.
Sure. Is there time between classes where they are allowed to do homework or practice or anything like that? I mean, they have nothing but time, I guess.
Mostly they take materials back to their cell or dorm room.
Okay.
A lot of them have dorm beds as opposed to cells. Some of them have a space they can even paint in their cells.
Oh, wow.
And it really gives them a sense of how they can spend time in a way that people outside can't. They can focus in a way that people outside can't. They can look at art in a way that certainly a lot of students at a lot of schools I taught at don't really have the bandwidth to focus on looking at something. But when we have a guest artist come in, like print class just had Toru Sugita, who's a teacher and printmaker, mostly etcher, come in, and their ability to look and absorb, knowing that they won't get a chance to see this again, that this is one moment to take in an artist's work who's gone out of their way to come to see them. It means a lot, and there's an intensity that is, I'm just talking about the positive aspects of prison, but I mean, there's an intensity of focus there that's really nice to see.
Yeah, time is a precious gift, really. And focus is a lost art, really.
I mentioned the steamroller print from several years ago, and now those who haven't passed away that worked on that are out. Most of them, I think, all of them are out or passed away. And we got together, a group of them, and made our own steamroller print event.
Oh.
And so we had a reunion tour and carved this 3-foot square block. And it was hard because some of them were in for 40 years. So now they're out, and time has a different feeling for them. So being able to put in the time to make art is sometimes very hard when you need to work and haven't worked and haven't established a retirement plan, and you're 75 years old and working ironwork or whatever they are doing, which is...
System is a little broken there on reentry.
But so it was great to work together and to be like a team of teachers and former students working all together on this project. But time was the really big struggle.
Yeah. While they're in and you're teaching inside the prison, how close can you become with the guys that are there? Like, is there a emotional connection? Are we friends? Do we talk when is this sort of a
talking.
mini?
I mean, there are like rules of over-familiarity and stuff, and there's been lots of stories of people becoming too familiar, which could be just like hugging would be over-familiarity. You certainly wouldn't do that. Fist bumping.
These are rules that are written by the prison people that you have to follow?
Yeah, I don't know if there's an anti-hugging rule. But in general, you want to be respectful of everybody, but you don't want to be too close. And this is just an idea of respecting their privacy in the sense that we don't go around the room at the beginning of the class and say, what crime did you commit or something.
Right.
They are a kind of blank slate when they walk in the room of somebody who's an artist. And I am there to make that work for them in the same way I would be in any classroom setting.
Right.
So
sure.
I don't really feel like it's that different than teaching at college, where I am close to the students.
Also wouldn't hug them. Right.
I also wouldn't hug them. That's right.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that it's become much more accepting. The prison system has been much more accepting of art classes and outside programming in California in recent years.
It seems like such a no-brainer. Creativity, art is a transformative thing for people. I don't know. It takes you away, it takes you out. Like, it can be so beneficial for folks. It's hard to imagine that they would say that's not a good idea.
Well, giving knives to a bunch of guys in a classroom can make the guards kind of stress out, right?
Oh, sure. I'm thinking about charcoal.
Right.
Pastels. So I wanted to also ask you about the impresario aspect of your life. People, if you go and Google Art Hazelwood and you see his website, he lists himself as, amongst other things, an impresario. And I thought, I have this image of P.T. Barnum as soon as I hear that. So I want to know what that means, really.
Well, I think of artists as needing to be more than just artists in the contemporary cultural setting. We are involved in art, of course, but then it could be broader than that. So I also say I'm an instigator, which is sort of my political hat. And then impresario, a big part of impresario for me was this idea of working with artists, especially older artists, in trying to get their estates into shape, curating shows, sometimes curating shows of contemporary artists, sometimes curating these historical shows like the Hobos to Street People show. And then writing. So writing the Mission Gráfica book. All of these are not really artists. They don't fall under artists, they fall under another category. So P.T. Barnum is my hat on that.
Your hat.
And I really feel like it's, I was saying earlier that in prison art is valued, and I feel that it's not valued as much often on the outside. And I think that it's up to artists to give people a reason to value art, in addition to their own art making. And a lot of artists do this now. I think it's much more common now as the art world has become much more like all of society into the elite and the rabble. And I think it's up to the rabble artists to actually make a culture for themselves. And I think artists do that more and more because the elite art world is much less interested in the rabble. And maybe, as you say, it's changing.
Well, yeah, I think there's always going to be the Art Basel people, and they're probably not going to wander down to the print fair down the street,
Right.
And I think that has to do with price point, literally price point. Like, they don't think that they are all that in a bag of chips if they don't spend $100,000 on something.
Right.
Well, they'll never make it. In the print world, that would never satisfy them, which is silly, of course.
Early 20th century in Germany, they called them the art proletariat.
Ah.
And this was, I think, a very interesting idea of the academy overproducing artists at the time and not really having any way for society to absorb so many artists. And they called them the art proletariat. And I think it's up to the art proletariat to make their own way, of course, in our society. There's no kind of systematic way that artists are incorporated into society. So we're all P.T. Barnum.
You and I certainly are. I mean, I've got a lot of hats on these days.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess it's even broader than, of course, it's broader than artists alone. It's the times kind of demand this multi-hat universe.
Yes, as more and more of us are gigging it. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. But I feel like you're pretty unusual. There are plenty of artists who are good writers and everything, but there's so many that are like, I'm terrible. I can't even come up with my own artist statement, and you're writing books, you know?
Well, artist statement is probably the hardest thing to write.
Well, yeah. All right. Well, so what else is happening these days? What are you working on next?
Well, I am working on, I think my horizon line's pretty short at the moment. So I have a week deadline to create some postcards for this Get Out the Vote campaign, design and print them. And working with a group in Louisiana in what's called Cancer Alley, called People, Power, and Light, which is doing a postcard campaign there, trying to make screen prints, 2-color screen prints that are appealing to people and also a little bit pointed, but not too pointed, because everybody in Cancer Alley is employed by the chemical industry that's killing them. So everybody's very conflicted there. So at this point, I'm thinking only about like, okay, what's in September? I don't have a longer term plan really at the moment.
Okay.
I'm working on a book that I've been working on for a year or more now on it's called Fascist Party Games.
What? Wait, hold on. Back up. More about that.
It's an artist book, screen print artist book. I have made several artist books that have kind of playful aspect to them, or board games in the past. I did an Iraqopoly. And it, you march around. The object of the game is to get to Baghdad and spin for an exit strategy.
Oh, God.
So I like this kind of interactive aspect of the making games and things. So my Fascist Party Games book has a split character where you can mix and match Trump's head and Putin's body with Marjorie Taylor Greene's feet or something like that. It's like a 3-part, flip. There's a whole bunch of different kind of aspects to this book. In fact, it's too complicated, and I don't know if I can really pull it off. I've printed it all, but now putting it together is the big obstacle. There's a board game in this one as well. It's no game, it's called.
But it's, we used to have this conversation at the BMA when we were discussing acquisitions, and our chief curator at the time, Jay Fisher, would always say to me when I had a penchant for bringing in political things, he would always say something about how if you have a work of art that's about a very specific time, a very specific happening, I can't even come up with an example, that generations later won't have any idea what you're talking about.
Fight for 15,
right?
For example.
Right. I became much more selective, and I would go for things that were about bigger ideas than a specific event, even if it was still political. It was tough. It was a tough line to cross.
I mean, I think several different things about. So the bigger political statement sometimes loses its punch because it's bigger. I think that, I think of Daumier and the specificity of what he was talking about might be lost, but the power of the piece is still there. I mean, we don't necessarily have to know what he was referring to know that these are great works of art. So that's a little bit different, but I think that, I guess the idea that art is long and life is brief, I kind of want to flip it on its head and say, art is brief. Art can be brief, and the ephemeral quality of art is something to value. And of course, a museum's not interested in the ephemeral necessarily, but the ephemeral can tell the story of a moment often better than a big general statement. War is bad.
Right.
Okay, war is bad. War is always bad, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily good art.
Well, for sure. And for us in Baltimore, we always knew that Catherine Blood was doing her best to, collect every pointed piece of in the moment, something, we knew she had it covered.
She's right down the street, so.
Yeah, she's just down the street. So I wasn't worried about going down to any of the rallies and grabbing signs from, students or something. So I left that to her.
But I think it's a point that any kind of political artist needs to think about for themselves as well, which is not dismissing. Maybe I should say it this way. I think for myself, I want to make big statements as well. And that's why I do a woodcut often, because a woodcut takes longer to create than a screen print for me. And I'm making a statement that is kind of a broader statement about the times, if it's political. I mean, not everything I do is political, but I'm making a statement about wider social issues within, like I'm doing this series, like see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And each of them have some kind of relationship. So see no evil is wearing the Google glasses. No offense, Google, who's providing this call for us. and just so it's an idea about AI and about a bigger issue about times is not saying AI, stop AI or something like that. It's not like a political slogan kind of art making. But I'm, of course, not averse to making political sloganeering as well. So
you sound like you're buying into my whole thing about pointed and very specific time-based things as being on the ephemeral end, and limited edition, much more intended for fine art museum type things as being more bigger idea pictures, images.
I'd say that's true. Yeah, I
want
to do both, actually.
We agree.
Sometimes, I'm not fighting against museums and making things more long-lasting. I do see a kind of weakening of message sometimes when people are making broad statements. I want to make statements about society in general. I want to make art that is more than just the slogan of the moment. But that doesn't make me feel like slogans are bad.
I've been thinking about this. Well, actually, I've been thinking about it for years. Why do you think it is that, and I'm going to get lambasted for making generalizations, but I feel like
I forget that we're talking to other people, right?
Right.
Start
I feel like
off
artists
about everything. Go ahead.
Tend to lean left.
Right.
And why is that?
I think people think that, and artists think that, but it's not necessarily true. It depends what you mean by left. Is a big part of it. But I don't think artists are as a class that political. I don't think it's an automatic thing, because the art world is a very class-oriented formation. There's quite a willingness of people who make all the right moves as leftists, but then work in a system that is very class-oriented. And they're serving a class interest. And it's really hard to just pretend that that isn't the case. So we're put in a bind as artists because we're not able to survive in many cases without serving somebody else's interests.
The
market's interests. And so is that leftist? Well, I mean, we believe in recycling, right? I mean, I don't know that I don't know that it flows automatically. I think that's one thing that isn't necessarily as true as people like it to be. But
maybe that's wishful thinking on my part.
I think it's interesting to try to evaluate a lot of work that is sort of seen as non-political from a very political stance and see whose interests this art is serving. And if you look at it that way, I think you'll see that a lot of art is not actually about, or not actually serving anybody's interests except an elite market.
That's so depressing.
It is kind of depressing, but I think that artists, for the most part, are left in the sense of that they are open and accepting of other people. So if that's a definition of leftist, yes, artists are mostly leftists.
Well, my way of describing the difference between conservative and liberal has always had to do with community and the I versus the we. We want to see society lifted up. And in my experience, most of my conservative friends are more concerned about their next, this, that, or the other, and they don't really think that they should be responsible for the guy down the street. And so I
hate
feel
where
like
this conversation's going, because
you
I
don't
feel
agree
like
with me at all.
No, I totally agree with you, but I also think try to name a more selfish group of people than artists. I mean,
fascinating.
I know that it's necessary for a lot of artists to be very self-centered, but doesn't quite fit with the idea that you just suggested of the difference.
You're right. What do we do? I feel like that's a little bit why
Maybe it's just a stereotype. Don't think too much about it.
Well, I mean, maybe that's why we're happy in the printmaking end of the art world, you know?
It's true. I mean, the attraction, like when I was teaching at the Art Institute, the students who had come from, say, painting and felt like, oh, suddenly they have a place to hang out, a place to interact with people, a place where they can share ideas and techniques. It does attract people who are more interested in a community, I think.
Well, and that goes to my model of I versus we, really.
Right. I read, I think Dan Leno at the Annex Galleries had this records, meeting minutes from this printmaking society in Los Angeles. It could be the LA Printmaking Society, but in the 1930s, they actually were debating whether they should price all their work the same.
Oh.
Like all of our prints, no matter how famous or how unknown, everybody's woodcuts are $30. Etchings, of course, 35 or something. I don't know what it was. But I just think even the debating of that idea is such a beautiful thought that is so diametrically opposed to whatever anybody has been taught about the art world
Right.
now.
Yeah. I mean, I always come back around to this idea that artists shouldn't have to deal with the market at all. And that somehow there should be a government, pay like the WPA, where you're just supported because art is an important facet of society, and we should leave you all, to your own devices and get out of the way,
Yeah, but then I'd be using that money to make posters against the government.
Right. Oh, it's just like a spinning whirlpool of cesspool.
Right. Berkeley Public Library had a checkout program in the Depression for prints. You could check out a print, WPA print.
Nice.
Borrow it for 2 weeks, return it. Nice.
Yeah. Well, I bet the school did too. Like at Oberlin, you go to the museum at the beginning of the year and they have, a selection of things that you can rent for the year and have art in your, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to think about like alternative models. I taught at the Art Institute, it went bankrupt. And I've seen other schools that seem to be following a very self-destructive path. Art schools that are dominated by people who are mostly business-oriented or top-down. Everything has to be decided by them. And I just think, what happened to the Black Mountain College idea? Not that that's the only model, but there's just doesn't seem to be an ability to reinvent things. And it's partially economics at the moment. It's just everything's so tight. So I feel this may be stronger in the Bay Area because it's really a collapsing art world. It's all the small museums have closed or stopped really functioning as museums, all the ones associated with colleges in the area. A lot of the art centers are in kind of chaos, falling apart in different ways, underfunded. Everybody's being forced out economically of the area. So it seems like we need to rethink things, but it's very hard to come up with an experimental model of something new, a new kind of approach to art school or a new kind of approach to making prints and making it a way for people to survive.
I'm thinking about it from the discussions we had in the museum for forever and ever. Like, where's the next audience, the next generation of audience going to come from? Because the stalwarts are all dying off. No offense, everybody. And sadly, the market is critical to the whole thing because you guys need to sell to survive. And where will the next collectors come from? Like, my kids are in their mid-20s. I'm not sure they'll ever be able to afford a house, much less start collecting art. It's incredible. Yeah, the dependence of artists on the collector is unfortunate, but it's a reality, right? So that's why we're doing this print fair in Brooklyn. It's hopefully going to attract a younger demographic in Brooklyn because we're all hipsters, right, people? And and just sort of start this ball rolling again, where lower, more emerging, lower price point galleries and print publishers can have their wares on view and for sale, and we'll get it going.
The interesting thing is that screen print and Rezo have a much more youth-focused audience.
Yes.
Youthful audience, I should say. And how to make it all about printmaking, maybe that's not really going to happen anymore. Maybe there's more of a like theme-based exhibitions where Rezo and screen print are the dominant things. I participate in shows where they are, in general, all kinds of different printmaking, and my work's the cheapest. And I participate in shows where it's mostly screen printers, and my work's mostly expensive.
Oh, funny.
And I just think there really are developing different worlds of printmaking. I have a soft spot for etching. I don't do that much of it. Lithography is beautiful, but it seems like the sort of youth-generated excitement is over Rezo and screen print.
But I haven't seen a lot of Rezo. I mean, I've seen enough of it to recognize it, but I haven't seen...
You see that pink once, you recognize Rezo.
Well, yeah, for sure. But I haven't seen an additioned set of things that, in my mind, would be museum worthy yet. I mean, I would like to see that occur and like to see an example of Rezo entering, the BMA's collection. That would be great because we didn't have any. But I don't know. It's hard. I don't know. It's so hard. I want everybody to succeed.
It's always exciting when you come across a new printmaker who's working, say, in etching or something. I was visiting Larry Warnock last week and saw an etcher. I don't remember the name of the artist, but beautiful big etchings and young artists from Iran. And think, wow, how great to see a really dynamic hand in the making of the art. That really, dry point mixed with aquatint and very beautiful surface and nice, interesting images. When you see something like that, you feel like, oh, it's all this panic about the art world is kind of silly. And there's great art being made.
It's true. Yeah, we're all going to be fine.
Right.
Oh, God. Yeah, it's I feel like the various techniques attracted a specific kind of mindset, personality,
right.
And I think etching probably feels antique to some people, but I sure do love it.
Yeah. What is that personality? I think the thing about the media, like I mentioned at the very beginning, that I found woodcut very appealing from the very beginning and kind of neglected everything else in my first class in printmaking. And I think it was a kind of recognition of, I'm just going to do it straight. I'm not going to redo it. You cut it and it's done. You can't go back. And that just appealed to me. So I think media can attract people in different ways and then kind of shape you if you spend enough time with it. Like I got to work with the grain on everything I do.
Right. True always talks about laboring over every cut. I mean, probably not in the background as much, but like that each one because of you're not going back sort of bit, like that every whisper cut of a shadow or something, he would actually put his knives down if he felt like he was going to fuck it up.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
away.
That kind of intensity of focus is great. I mean, I think I don't have that kind of approach to things. I approach things more in the spirit of being in the zone when I'm working on it, as opposed to thoughtful intention. Probably could benefit from thoughtful intention, but I kind of work with this idea that when I have the energy and the focus, it just happens.
I think True could benefit from letting go sometimes too. So there's room for both, I think.
I think of Kate Kolwitz's woodcuts and how they look very spontaneous.
Yeah.
And yet she actually did several versions of the same woodcut. And the mastery that she has of white line, black line, and keeping it feeling very spontaneous. I always show her work when I've taught woodcut as like the first example, because just getting trapped in this idea of how you approach a black line or a white line in woodcut can be very limiting to people in how they make their work. Like they just take a U-gouge and they go like this and they make all this stuff. But that the power and spontaneity that it feels like, it's mixed with this extreme clarity of planning. So that's what I think is my ideal, what I'd like to achieve.
Yeah, that's the perfect balancing point, right? Spontaneity with intention.
Or at least make it look spontaneous.
Well, that's a good question. Like, how do you make it look? Like, I always think of those Baskin, Sumi ink woodcuts.
Oh, those lines,
yeah. Those look pretty spontaneous to me. But
I don't think they are.
No.
They don't look like they're cut spontaneously.
No. I mean, that's the kind of the beauty of woodcut. Like, you can only be so spontaneous.
Have you seen those Munakata videos of him painting with his sumi brush on this, like, out in the grass, a bunch of little wood panels laid out. He paints with this big brush, and then he cuts them, and he pays no attention to what he's painted, and he's got glasses this thick, and he's just like,
oh my God.
They're amazing to see because of that, the spontaneity, the lack of control. I mean, the lack of need to control.
Maybe easier to be spontaneous with abstract imagery.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of Zen Buddhist approach to calligraphy that I think he was influenced by. So,
all right. Well, we've talked more than an hour. Have we missed any major nuggets that we need to talk about, and then we'll wrap up?
I don't know what kind of nuggets we could talk about. Should we have like?
I mean, we could talk for hours.
Yeah. Did we cover anything that we covered last time?
Yes, I wrote down the only thing that we didn't cover, which we don't have to cover, is we talked about Catherine Metz and her connection to Hayter.
Oh, right.
And the viscosity, quote unquote, printing and all of that stuff. But
I could say that, I mean, my teacher, who I was taking this first introductory class in printmaking with, was Catherine Metz, who taught at UC Santa Cruz and studied at Atelier 17. And her approach to, I mean, at that time she was doing what I had first heard called color viscosity, but I've later been chastised that that's not the correct thing for it. Simultaneous.
I think I chastised you. Sorry.
Catherine, she worked in screen print and she worked in etching, and it was all this layering. In her paintings also, she did these, what I would like to call slow paintings, where you would look at them and they were kind of pointless, giant pointless paintings, and they would slowly emerge. The landscape would slowly emerge as you looked at it. But, I mean, I think her approach was somewhat Atelier 17 in the sense that it just, here's the materials, and it's about this idea of struggling with materials as your first move into printmaking. It's not about image making. It's about how you learn to work with or work through the materials. And so maybe part of my attraction to woodcut was just this idea of that. I liked the feedback that the material gave me. I liked having to fight the grain or find the way through the grain. And I think that's kind of an interesting link with Atelier 17, as I understand it, with this approach to material and finding your way, like with the first hard dry point line or engraved line that they did, often as a first introduction to Atelier 17.
Right. Yeah, the Buren studies.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and quickly to segue into automatist drawing, the sort of letting your subconscious do what it will do. Yeah.
Right. I was very interested to learn. I didn't know until recently that there was a surrealist element to Atelier 17.
Oh, absolutely.
Approach.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Hayter himself exhibited with the surrealists, but he was not a card-carrying member of the surrealist group. He never signed the contract that Breton would make people sign.
Right.
and
they were very clubby,
Hayter,
weren't they?
Yeah, and Hayter wandered away from the group after Breton got into a fight with, I forget which person it was, but it was a friend of haters, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm out."
Aragon, probably.
Yeah, I can remember. And but he retained that idea of letting the subconscious, that the artist was probably uniquely in touch or learned how to let it drive creativity, and that was very much part of his method.
I mean, I don't want to like keep going forever because I know that you don't have that much time also, but I think this idea that there is a place for the subconscious in art has kind of been crushed by the very academic approaches to art in art schools that I've encountered.
And the market.
Yeah, I mean, everything is very rationalized. I started asking in critiques in my classes, I started asking, but what does this make you feel? And it was kind of like a question they'd never gotten because they'd been taught in art criticism classes to like evaluate it for its formal qualities, for lack of a better word.
Right.
But there's this basic idea of like, why are we even looking at it then? I don't know. We have to bring back Freud, but it's like the subconscious is a valuable aspect to human experience.
Well, I think being attuned with your own reactions to a work of art is important, and I think people have lost that ability. Well, I don't know. I'm talking out of my who knows, but I know I subscribe to the theory of the sublime. When I come across a particularly fantastic work of art, there's something that kind of wells up in you, and you're just like, "Oh my God, that's incredible! That's beautiful! I love it! I want it!" Whatever. So
right.
I think,
and it's not because it's making this particular. It's not say it's portraying a scene in a park. It's not because it's portraying a scene in the park. It's not because they're drawing a perfect rendition of a photograph in the class at San Quentin. It's how that makes you feel when you look at it. Does this character that's translated from a photograph into a graphite drawing, does that carry something more to it, something emotional to it? Then it enters into the subconscious and the sublime.
I mean, I definitely have a soft spot for a well-executed photorealist something just because of the skill,
Right. But there's something more. And they can work together, and that's kind of a very weird thing that when it happens, when there's a photorealist quality and an emotional sense to it.
Interesting.
I mean, and so I'm just wondering about this, like bringing back some of these older ideas of what inspired artists. When I was teaching, I would sometimes read a statement from like 1970 minimalist artists about what is the most important thing in art, because it would just be so completely foreign to the students. The eternal verities of art is the way colors interact, or the way, light hits the surface. These are not eternal verities. These are what interests me at the moment. That the phases that the art world goes through are very funny. But the sincerity that artists approach it is also important.
Sure. Oh, yes. I need genuine people for sure. But also my taste changes. Our taste, everybody's taste changes,
Right.
like it's bizarre.
I was just talking to someone this morning about this idea. When I was a student, I remember hearing one of the teachers say, all the students are making gigantic paintings because they see slideshows in the lecture room. And that's the only place they see art. And now everybody's looking at art on Instagram and making these little tiny things.
Oh my God.
So that's a very funny
that's hilarious.
Concept. Like we are so like unconsciously driven by where we see art, how we see art.
Oh, that's fascinating. And that kind of lines up with, creating art that looks better on Instagram than in real life.
Right.
Like, what are we doing?
Wait a minute. Instagram is real life.
Yeah. You're not even on Instagram, Art, are you?
No, I never did.
No. Because sometimes at the end of conversations, I say, so where can people find you most easily? And everyone's like, on my Instagram. And
my answer is on the street.
Oh my God. You are you have a special spirit about you for art and its power and its meaning for people. I think it's really wonderful.
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the fight. I'm enjoying the way to interact with the world. When I'm printing on the street and somebody comes up and wants a poster and says they're going to put it in their SRO hotel room, that they don't have anything on the walls, and I think, okay, art has value. So it's very rewarding.
Nice. And you give it away, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's all free.
Okay. Of course.
Of course. It's the best way to get rid of art. Give it away.
You could open up your drawers. I'm sure some of us would come knocking.
Just hit me up anytime.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Oh, God. Well, thank you for talking and getting all philosophical with me. It's been really fun.
It's been fun, yeah. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Let's do it
Third
next week
time's the charm.
when the computer actually works next time.
Right. Right. Yeah, and thanks to David Avery for lending his technological setup. Those are David's books. Good to have friends with, good internet.
Right.
Right. All right. Well, thank you again. It's been really great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark. I am so happy to have had a conversation with Art Hazelwood. I think he's fascinating, and I'm so excited that he's coming to Brooklyn for the Fine Art Print Fair there in March. So, as I said at the top, put it on your calendar. Thanks to him for being a great guest. I really enjoyed our talk. And also a thank you to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for being my sound guy. Thanks, Dan. And one to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. Also one other to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for their studio soundscapes that I've cobbled together at the top and bottom of each episode. Thanks, guys. And what else? I think that's all the thank yous. Please, please, please put the Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair on your calendar, March 27 to 30. All of the details about the fair are over on its website, brooklynprintfair.org. Not .com, but .org, because it is Powerhouse Arts, another .org. It's their fair. So check out the website. You'll see a list of all the exhibitors, and tickets will go on sale at probably in the beginning of February. So take a gander at those. All right. I think that's it. Did I say? Pictures are over on the show notes, over at platemarkpodcast.com. I'm not sure I did. Go enjoy those, and I put some bonus Art Hazelwood images up there that we didn't talk about directly, but they're there for you in the show notes, so go check them out. And I think otherwise, that's it. We'll see you next time.